Let's try that again with the mute button off. All right, here we go. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Power of Man podcast. You know, when you start that way, you're going to have a lot of fun, folks. So here we go. My name's Rory Paquette, and I know you all know that already, but I just like to remind myself how grateful I am to be sitting in this chair. When we made the move to 5 days of content, you folks were amazing the way you stepped up. When we made the move to 7 days, you came through even harder to where Sundays are some of our best episodes now. Really and truly, if you're not out there doing what you're doing, the liking, the sharing, the following, then I can't sit here and do what I'm doing. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, folks. If you're a friend of the program, and I know you are, you know what time it is. It's time to pay some bills. So let me take a sip of my preferred beverage. Man, that stuff is good. And you know what we're drinking? That's right. It's Freedom Hill Coffee at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram. Go look them up, check them out. Deep, dark, rich, bold, and beautiful. Just like my wife. It's an amazing cup of coffee. It's absolutely fantastic. They do all the right things for all the right reasons, and they support veterans, which is one of the biggest reasons why we support them. Folks, if you're out there and you're a veteran listening, thank you for your service. We love you. And we are so glad that you found a home here at the Power of Man podcast. Folks, go check them out. Freedom Hill Coffee at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram, and tell them Power Man sent you. And my voice is just dying on me today, so I'm going to have to, take another sip of this preferred beverage so I can keep up with this young buck across the table from me. He's already laughing at me. You see this? Oh my goodness! All right, here we go. Please welcome to the show, author of the book Alpha: Eight Challenges of the Modern Man, coming soon. And also producer of his own YouTube channel with his own name. Please welcome Kirk Kappelhoff to the show. Kirk, how you doing, brother?
Very, very good. I second your love of both coffee and veterans. So thank you for that. And thank you for having me on the show. Very happy to be here.
Right on, man. I love that opening. That's perfect. You covered everything. Coffee and veterans, and those are checking those boxes. We're good. All right, Kirk, I know we got a lot to talk about with your book and your movement and everything else you're working on. Hey, before we get rolling, tell everybody who is Kirk Kappelhoff. What are you about? What's your story, brother?
Yeah, sure. So born in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, moved to Australia and spent most of my life there. Now I live in the US, live in New York City, came over here to play college soccer and stuck around. It turns out you guys have a phenomenal country and I really like that and a lot of opportunity here and I'm a huge fan of that. And recently, as you mentioned, I've been working on this topic regarding masculinity, mainly trying to answer this question, how should a man be? You hear a lot of stuff out there. I've got advice from Jordan Peterson. I've got advice from Andrew Tate. It's a lot easier to tell you when I hear something that doesn't sound right, but it's a lot more difficult to listen to something and say, that sounds about right. And that's kind of where this journey started. But on this journey of trying to figure out at a personal level how men should be, I've come across some very striking statistics at a macro level for masculinity in general. And the book touches first on the macro piece. What is the state of men today? And then it goes into a more micro piece. How can I adapt that to my life? In general, I've phrased it across eight challenges, four internal, four external. The inner challenges of men are what you might consider the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. There's no avoiding those. Every man has those challenges, and we can talk a little bit about what those are. But then there's the external as well. These are things outside of ourselves, but still inevitable. These would be financial, and then professional slash vocational, which would be different than the financial, believe it or not, and then relational and social. And in almost every category since 1970, it seems that men are lagging previous generations of men. For whatever reason, there is a decline that we see in in all of physical strength, finances, loneliness, and then frankly, relationally with significant others. And it's very interesting, these trends. And again, we can talk about that in more detail, but at a high level, that's the discussion that I'm trying to have. And the impact is quite strong. At first, I thought this was just for me, but what I've realized in talking to other men about it, doesn't matter the age, it seems that these challenges are truly eternal and somewhat timeless.
Nice. Let me ask you just to back up for a second. What was it that really got you into asking that question? Was there something that happened in your life, or did you have some sort of situation, or was it really just curiosity that said, what is a man actually supposed to be?
It's a great question. I think what shook up my life was when I got home from work one day and my wife of 3 years said she wanted a divorce and she wanted me out that day. And I think that kind of shook things up a little bit. What I had thought had been this incredibly successful life of traveling international, playing D1 soccer, having a really good job and a really good career, all of a sudden crumbled. And now everything you thought was the way to be just dissipates. It's not like anything went wrong. No one, from as far as I'm aware, was cheating or domestic violence or anything along those lines. But clearly something was missing. And it got me thinking in general, what am I doing wrong? So I had a couple years of what I called controlled chaos. I had lived my life on the straight and narrow for so long. And then I thought, what would it be like to live on the other side of the road? What would it be like to live in a little bit of controlled chaos where I'm going to go out and experience life a little bit, but I know I'm always going to come back to the straight and narrow. And I did that. And I can tell you, for anybody listening, any young men, just stay on the straight and narrow. The crazy chaos of life, there's a lot better ways that you can live than in the chaotic world. Order is better. So to answer your question simply, that would be the monumental moment that kind of got me thinking about all of this. But ever since I was a kid, I think reaching the highest state of my own potential has always been on my mind. We're all born with different potential. I can't reach the potential of somebody that was born with just naturally more skill than me, but I can reach my own potential, and that part excites me. How can I maximize and be most efficient with who I am?
Wow. Okay. I mean that that makes total sense. Um, as you've been working through this, have you found some things in all the research that you've done, looking back on, how your marriage was beforehand,
Mm.
where you look back and go, man, if I'd have known this now, I would have done that different.
Um, a lot of things. Narrowing it down would be quite difficult to just say this is the one lesson that solves all
Sure.
marital issues, I guess you could say. But I think keeping your family very close to you, especially if you trust them, and keeping your friends very close to you as well in that sort of, let's call it an audit process of significant others and partners. That's a
Mm.
very good idea. The moment you become isolated, you are at risk of being removed from your values and your character. There's this great saying that people show you their personality in the good times and their character in the hard times. And I think it's very easy to forget what that character is if you've got a significant other in your life while you're removed from your roots. And it's easy to just forget that and just become something else. And that was my personal challenge. It was very easy for me to just kind of fall into and adhere to just one person. That was my mistake. What is likely the right move, and you hear Jay Shetty talk about this a lot, you should not make your partner everything. You need a mom and dad to be a mom and a dad, and they have their role in your life. You need, if you have siblings, their input. You have friends to have that input. Then you have a significant other. Now, they should be a big portion of your life, of course. Right? There's no doubting that. I doubt that. Warren Buffett says that the single greatest decision you'll make that'll determine your happiness is the partner you choose. So I guarantee that. But to make it 100% is not fair to either you or to them. And I think that's the risk. So keep a circle of people around you while you're in that dating process.
That's incredibly insightful to have come up with that, and it's very powerful too, to not let yourself be isolated like that.
Mm,
I think when we say things like that, folks who are not our normal listeners would hear that and they would say, well, the woman isn't trying to isolate you, and it's not even a case of someone trying to do it to you. It's just what
sure.
happens through life. Am I getting that right?
Totally. Yeah, it can be one of those things where if you haven't purposefully made the decision to not isolate yourself, like you said, the gravity of a relationship can just bring you into that isolation. You hear it all the time, like in a college level, for example, where like all of a sudden you never see, Joe Schmo because he's always with his girlfriend now. That sort of thing is very easy to fall into.
Sure. So you have the divorce, and I'm sorry for that in your life. That's always rough, no matter what. But you have that happen, and so that starts the journey of trying to kind of figure some of this out and really investigate, some of these things. Um, but somewhere along the way, you say, "Look, I found out a bunch of stuff that I want to share
Mm,
with the world, and I'm going to go ahead and write a book." And, everybody thinks about writing a book, but not everybody does. You did. I mean, it's not out yet. It's on its way, but you went and wrote a book. So what helped you make that transition from I feel strongly about this to let's put it in writing and release it to the world?
Yeah, great question. So originally, like I said, it was just how do I live? But then as I was doing my research, I realized, wow, there is some truths here that, as a guy that keeps up to date with these things pretty decently, I had no idea about. And I can imagine other men would want to learn too. So let me take this at a macro level for you.
Mhm.
Starting in high school, the top 10% of grade holders or the top 10 percentile, 66% of are female. If you look at the bottom 10 percentile, 66% of those are male. Then you go to graduation rates that go on to college. Well, the average in the average class has 70% of females going on to college, only 40% of males. Okay, now you're in college. What happens there? Well, the grade distribution is pretty similar to what we saw in high school. But now after college, we're seeing that the typical wage gap that we thought of, now it's usually considered the parenting gap because it seems to be more correlated with that than it does with gender specifically. In 22 of the largest cities in America, between the ages of 16 and 29, the girls and the women are out earning the men and the boys for the same job and title. And you're going, okay, well, what's happening here? Very interesting shift. Now we know women entered the workforce at increasingly large rates, starting mainly in the 70s. And the answer is certainly not hold women back. Women have made great strides and they should continue to make it. And that is not concerning at all. If we saw kind of a bar chart, let's just say, and we saw the increase and explosion of women's success, and we saw that increasing massively, and then we saw men increasing, but at a slower rate, that wouldn't be concerning. What's concerning is that that men's line chart or bar chart is decreasing. On every level between 1970 and today, mainly 2021, when these studies were recorded, men are falling behind. Let's take the 8 challenges that I mentioned, for example. Mentally, we already mentioned educationally how they're lagging behind not only women, but then previous generations of men. Emotionally, men are feeling more isolated than they've ever felt in their entire lives. The self-reported loneliness rate used to be 12%. It spiked to 20%. When we take a look at something physically, a great proxy for physical strength is just grip strength. If you have a strong grip strength, it's likely the rest of you is in tandem with that grip strength. Well, in 1970, when your grandpa was probably 30 years old, grip strength was 117 pounds. Today, a 30-year-old's average grip strength is 98 pounds. And in fact, a lot of studies actually show a decline in men so far that it might actually go behind the average women's score, the median women's score as well. Okay, so that's mentally, that's physically, emotionally as well. But then what do we have spiritually? Well, spiritually, that's difficult to define. How do you know where the spiritual ends and the emotional starts, those sorts of things?
Yeah.
We already know that there's declining rates, and let's just say something like church. But that's not so much what I'm talking about when I mention spiritual. I'm talking about what we call deaths of despair. These are men taking their own lives. And we know without a shadow of a doubt that men are increasing their rates of suicidal ideation and then resulting in suicide. In fact, if we were to have kept the rate of suicide in the year 2000 constant to today, instead of it increasing, we would have 400,000 more men alive in the US today than what we do. Just to give some perspective, that's more men than what died in the US in World War II. Okay, so from an
Wow.
internal perspective, we've got a lot happening here, and this is just men compared to previous generations of men. We are not even concerned with men against women because that's not really a battle. Women can
Right.
succeed and men can succeed in the same way that life expectancy has increased for both genders. So then we go to the external challenges. What are those? Well, financially, are men earning more? Well, in nominal wages, sure, but of course you have to take inflation into account. And when you take inflation into account, the peak of men's earnings in the US was in the year 1970. Since then, they've experienced about a 13% or $13,000 decline in purchasing power. Okay, so
Wow.
that's financially. Professionally or vocationally, men don't even want to work as much. Coming out of college in 1972, 98% of men were in the workforce. What that means is they either had a job or were looking to find one, right? You're not counted if you're not looking for a job. Now that rate's 87%. It's over a 10% decline in just the men that want to work. Well, let's take a look at socially. Maybe if they're not working, they're hanging out with their friends. Well, the number of men that reported having zero close friends in 1990 was 3%. Today, that rate is 15%. On top of that, the average man who says he has more than 10 close friends has gone down from 10% to 3%. And so not only are relationships likely less occurring, but these friendships are less strong. How do we know that? Well, if you were to ask people in 1985, who is the first person you'd call when you have a need for a helping hand, like moving something in your house? 85% of the time, the first call would be to a friend. Today, that number has decreased to 30%. Who are they calling instead? Mom and dad. Now, that's fine, reaching out to mom and dad, except for the statistic that follows, which is that 35% of men between the ages of 22 and 30 are living at home with mom and dad. And that part is concerning. That's more than the number of men that are living with a partner or with a wife. Okay, so we've got all of these pieces coming together. The last of which is just relationally, and depending on how you look at relationships, there's various different success factors. We know men are getting married later; everybody is. But one that is quite striking is only between the ages of 18 and 30, 1 in 3 men haven't had sex in the last year, which is quite interesting as well. That is substantially higher than what it was at 10% in 1990.
Give me that one
And it's
again.
not because men
Give me that
one
one
third
again.
of men,
Yeah.
oh, sorry, yeah, 1/3 of men haven't had sex in the last year, and that's up from 10% in 1990. And that's between the ages of 22 and 30. Very interesting. And why is that? Is it because all of a sudden they decided to fall in love with the idea of celibacy? I don't think so. I think it's because they're not putting themselves out there. They are at home. You're not going to go on a date and then bring a girl back to mom and dad. Um, and so this is what we're dealing with. This is kind of the scope across the 4 internal challenges and then the external, what I call the external gauntlet. And the question is, okay, if this is true at a macro level, which I'm very sure it is, and Richard Reeves, who'd found a lot of these insights, he has incredible policy recommendations to handle these. What do I do as just the average everyday guy? How do I adapt to these ever-growing statistics that seem to be quite terrible? Well, when you take a deep look inside of these statistics, one thing that jumps out is that the 90%, the bottom 90% of men have never had it worse, as we've discussed. But the top 10% of men have never had it better. So the question becomes, how do I move myself into the bottom 90%, which have never had it worse, to the top 10%, which are just kicking butt? They're earning more. They likely have remote jobs, so they have more freedom and flexibility. They're stronger than ever before. In general, the top 10% of men are richer, healthier, happier, more desired by the opposite sex than ever. While the bottom 90% are lonelier, poorer, more devastated, and not attracted to and by the opposite sex in the same rates that we've ever seen in history. And so that's the lay of the land. And my question is essentially, how do we get from the 90% to the 10%? This is where the book really delves into things.
Wow. I mean, all of that just wow. I never interrupt my guests, and I apologize for
It's a
interrupting you.
lot.
Wow, I really do apologize for interrupting you on that one, but that just knocked me
No,
over.
no, no.
I was like, wait, what? Did I just hear that right? Um, wow, Kirk. These are I mean, they're crazy statistics. I'm almost speechless, which never happens either. But in order to find out how to move into the 10%, do we first need to find out why this is going on so that, like if you don't know why something happened, you're doomed to repeat it type of thing?
Incredible question, and a very natural next question in terms of here's the problem, why is there a problem?
Right.
When we ask the researchers who study this, and I'll talk about a couple studies here in a second, why this is happening, there's a resounding answer, we don't know. For example, it's incredible. For example, if you take a look at social programs that are aimed to, let's just say, help kids, not even men or boys, get into college or graduate college or receive a job after college, what we seem to see is that in general, the social programs aren't very effective at doing that. But for the ones that are, women are taking advantage of them and seeing all the benefit, and men are just not. There's not some disparity where women have an easier job of getting these social programs than men. For example, in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where they have a program to offer free college, women see a 67% ROI on this investment. We are seeing a massive benefit in how they determine ROI, which is a pretty complex calculation for women. Men, it's not even a measurable benefit. Essentially, the entire program is just benefiting women. In New York here, they had the Paycheck Plus program. Their incentive was for 3,000 people, give them an extra $2,000 to hold their job down. Women took full advantage of that. They loved it and they held down their jobs and they received the money and they reported self-success with the program. Men in this report said that there was no measurable effect amongst the men. Why is that happening? Well, there's a couple theories. One of them is what's known as the theory of purpose, and then one is, or the problem of purpose, sorry. And then there's the dandelion orchid hypothesis. When we talk about the problem of purpose, what we're saying is this. Traditionally, the role of men was the three P's: protector, provider, procreator. Protector, obviously, protect the tribe, protect your wife, protect your kids. Provider, typically being the financial provider. Procreator, pretty self-explanatory. Well, let's evaluate that now. In today's society, at least in the West, protector, when you're walking down the streets, do you really see tigers going around? Are there real threats? Not as much. So that role is somewhat fading. Provider, well, we've just said before that women are earning just as more, if not as much as men, and that's in the early years. Of course, those generations will continue on. So we're not needing to see them as a provider anymore. So the last role is procreator. And scientifically, at least theoretically, we don't even need men for that. And that's always kind of been a default role anyway. So men are struggling with this problem of purpose. Where then
Mm.
do they go to find their purpose? One answer, video games. We have seen that the number of hours that men and boys, not just boys, spend on
Yeah.
video games double in the year since 2005 and 2015. And when they do this study again at the end of 2015, we expect to see it close to double again, which means that, and that just to put numbers there, that's 5 hours to 10 hours per day, right? And that is striking numbers for the average gamer. Now, why are they going there? Well, when you come out into a reality where you've come out of a pretty hostile time for boys, where things like toxic masculinity and masculinity have almost become synonymous, where would you rather be? In the reality where you're inherently evil, or in a video game where you can jump 3 times your height and you can respawn if something goes wrong and experiment and you can talk to your friends even if you don't know what they look like? The reality there is much more attractive than the reality here for a lot of men. And that piece is a separate issue in and of itself. That's the problem of purpose. The orchid dandelion side of things is more goes into developmental psychology. In general, dandelions exist in any weather. They're going to bloom whether it's rain, hail, or shine. Orchids require, perfect sunlight, perfect conditions, and when they bloom, they're absolutely beautiful. What we see when it comes to children in developmental psychology, girls tend to be dandelions and boys tend to be orchids. There's no hard and fast rule, of course. This is just tendencies. And when we look at something like that, what that suggests is zip codes matter. And when we look at the statistics, boys that grow up in Detroit, Fresno, certain parts of Chicago, they have a harder time developing because their environment affects them more than girls. For example, if you look at the bottom 20% of those same cities from a socioeconomic perspective that I mentioned, and you say, okay, how do the boys and girls fare when they come from the bottom 20% socioeconomic status? Well, on average, girls have a 68% higher likelihood of going to college if they come from those zip codes than boys do. 68%.
Wow.
Well, what happens if we change it and we take a look at the top 20 percentile? What's the variation there? 5%. This is why it's very interesting to analyze that. This isn't something the kids have done. It's not something the parents have done. There just seems to be this inherent maturity delay between boys and girls. Girls definitely mature earlier from a cognition perspective And we've known this not only just from as parents observing kids, but then also studying them. And so your zip code matters. Interestingly, your teacher matters. Back when the split between gender roles on teachers was male and female, it was closer to 50. It was never quite 50-50. We didn't see these effects, but now that it's become, I think it's 87% female in zero or first to sixth grade, we see the effect it's having on boys. Boys under a female teacher are more likely to act out and less likely to pay attention than boys under a male teacher. Why is that? Well, again, you're delving into a lot of theories,
Mhm.
but in general, men and boys look at authority figures, specifically in men, at a different way than they look at females. And just to give a sobering statistic here, there are currently more female U.S. fighter pilots in the U.S. Air Force than there are male primary school teachers, which
Uh,
is wild.
Wow, that's completely wild. I love this conversation that we're having. I appreciate. I mean, you've done a ton of research, brother.
Mm,
I mean, wow. I knew that when I watched your YouTube, an episode on your YouTube talking about all this, and I mean, you were spitting facts like crazy. But this is, even more intense. Sitting here listening to it one on one on the show.
sure.
So kudos to you for all the work you've done on this. Um, if we and I understand the why is subjective in a lot of ways too, to a lot of different things. There's political issues, there's socioeconomic issues, but with what you've laid out, then I guess we are to the question that you were talking about a few minutes ago, which is okay. Then if this is the why, then what's the how to start changing it?
Totally. Yeah. And so this is where there's an interesting switch between the macro solutions and the micro solutions. Richard Reeves, Scott Galloway, both of these guys have done a lot of research in this area, and they recommend a lot of macro changes. Scott Galloway a bit more micro, but in general, something that Richard Reeves recommends is starting boys a year later in school. Since there is a built-in maturity and cognition delay, start them a year later, and then they will be completely caught up. That's one idea. Another idea is invest in social programs that affect the likelihood that a man will want to become a primary school teacher, for example. If we know that male role modeling is really important, then invest in that. We've seen it work with women. In fact, no one expected women to explode into the workforce and see the successes that they did in the way that it has come about. And when you read the research papers on this, both men and women are flabbergasted at how well the social programs work there. Okay, so if that worked for them, let's do it for our boys as well so that they can have their advantages sort of equaled out from a primary school level. So that's at a macro level. At a micro level, this is where my book delves into. This is a lot harder to answer because everybody's um, solution might look a little bit different. When you look across those 8 challenges, it may be the case that you are already a top 10% male physically. Maybe you work out a lot. Maybe you take care of your body and eat well, but you don't have 2 cents to your name, right? And because you find yourself lazy or something in the workforce. Maybe it's switched, which is probably even more common. You have the really hard worker that men typically idolize their salary or their net worth as a marker, and that's something I touch on in the financial section and reframing that. If that is something that we idolize, then we lay everything else behind us. We leave our family behind. We leave our body behind, for example, and we lose our health and fitness. Well, there's no point in having $10 million if you're gonna die at 50, right? And so this sort of question of balancing out the 8 challenges of our life so that we can sort of adapt and be a high achiever in all of them rather than being a multi-million dollar achiever in just one area. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Wow. Okay, interesting. Um, all right. So your book, does your book give actionable steps for, guys to take or anything like that? I mean, how do guys start taking steps towards changing this um, um, pattern in their own lives? Because that's where it has to
Sure.
start is, we have to start doing it for ourselves first. So,
100%.
as individual men and as all my listeners are. We're over 85% men on this show. So
Mm.
that's who you're talking to right now. And they're all going, okay, this stinks. I don't like anything I'm hearing, but I feel every single thing coming out of your mouth, Kirk. I mean,
Mm.
they're all going, yep, that sounds about right. That's great for us all to kind of just sit here and feel bad about. But what can the guys in the audience do to start taking the next step to start breaking out of this stuff?
For sure. Yeah, good question. So the very first challenge or chapter of the book is the mental challenge, the challenge of mentality. And as with all of these, where you define your bounds on mentality and spirituality and emotional, that can determine what you're talking about. In the mental section, what I'm talking about is the everyday battles that we have in our minds. My alarm goes off at 5 a.m. I want to wake up. Part of me wants to, and part of me just wants to lay in bed. That's a mini battle in our mind that I can win or lose. You get up and then you decide, I don't really want to go to the gym, but part of you wants to go to the gym. That's another mini battle. You face these constantly. How can I become a man that more often than not, perhaps close to 100%, chooses the right thing rather than the other thing I want? I want to follow my diet, but that cake that Joe just bought into work looks really good. Maybe just one bite, right? These are the challenges of the mind. This is the mental challenge. And not to give away too much, but one of the things that we delve into, and of course it's very psychology based in that section, is a part of the brain that's known as the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, the AMCC. Listeners of Huberman, Andrew Huberman, might know a little bit about this. It's very rare that we identify in the brain one area that deals exclusively with one function. For example, you have Wernicke's area and Broca's area that deal with speech and comprehension. If those get damaged, it's very likely that your speech or comprehension will get damaged. We've isolated the function to one area. The AMCC, they are at least speculating, could be the center for willpower, which is huge. In other words, as your AMCC grows, your willpower increases. As your AMCC decreases, so too does your willpower. How have they tested this? Well, they did this one study, which was super interesting, where they took two groups of people. One of them, they said you were going to do an additional 5 hours of stretching and yoga-like exercises per week. The other group, they were going to do an additional 5 hours of cardio-based training. And so already you probably know which group you want to be in, depending on who you are, right? Cardio is a lot harder. What they realized was this. In the cardio group, they saw a higher increase in the AMCC, the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, than they saw in the yoga group. Why? Well, as it turns out, doing things you don't want to do tends to correlate with an increase in the AMCC. But here's what's more interesting. Once those people who were in the cardio section, they were typically doing running or rowing, once they self-reported an increasing desire to do the running or the rowing, the AMCC stopped increasing. In other words, once you start liking the things that you used to hate, the AMCC stops growing. Meaning, this truly corresponds with overcoming some resistance, overcoming some struggle against something you don't like. Maybe today you're a guy that doesn't like to run. Like, I'm never going to do it. It's not going to happen. But you decide, you know what? I went to the doctor. He says my cardiovascular health needs some increase. I'm going to do it. So you start running. And every morning you hate it. Well, your AMCC will correspond with growth. And then maybe 2 months in, you go, you know what? I actually really like running. You will still see the cardiovascular benefits. Of course, you're running. But your AMCC won't grow because now you enjoy it. Super interesting. All that to say, if you want to become a man that has the ability to say yes to the things that he wants to say yes to. I want to go to the gym. I want to eat healthy. I want to apologize to my wife, even though I know I shouldn't, right? Or even I don't want to, right? All these different things, then do hard things. Hard things are the answer to you increasing your willpower in the long run. And of course, it's a positive feedback loop. I do something hard, which increases my AMCC, which makes it easier for me to do something hard, which increases my AMC, and so on and so forth. In cases of depression, we see a very small AMCC. And there are very real cases where depression needs to be addressed, and there's very real use cases and medication. All that aside, there's also a very real truth. to a glorification of depression. And part of the answer to that could be, as speculated by some of these experts, doing harder things. When life's given to you so easily, and the hardest problem you have is that your coffee's too cold when you get it from Starbucks, maybe it's time to start doing harder things in your life. Now, understanding this has changed my life drastically. Now, of course, the very moment I hear that something's hard, I want to do it more because I know I'm going to see the benefits of that in the long run. But before knowing about the AMCC, I would have just thought, that's too hard. The struggle would have been harder. So you can already see kind of the feedback loop in that sense, but that's even before all the mental benefits of it as well. Does that make sense?
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, you've medically and scientifically proven that the key to becoming a better man is to do hard stuff.
Right.
I mean, that's
It's
just
true.
really amazing to me that there's scientific evidence to show that we can't just sit here and be comfortable with our lives and we have to constantly challenge ourselves.
100%. And
Holy
Huberman's got a
cow.
great podcast on it as well. So just look up AMCC and Huberman and you will find it. I'll obviously be releasing a lot of this stuff as well, more pinpointed, not so much on the neuro benefit of it, but just
Yeah.
in general to your day-to-day life at the micro level.
Wow. Brother, I love what you just laid out for everybody. You folks, you need to more than likely go back and re-listen to this podcast, okay, so that you can get all of this stuff because Kirk is throwing out gold to every one of you guys who has been pissed off for the last, decade. And all right, so Kirk, why don't we, in the time we have left, let me go ahead and
Mm,
tell everybody about your YouTube channel and kind of what you cover there because I know you get into some other subjects too, on that YouTube channel. Seems very educational.
definitely. In general, I want to give men the tools that I find helpful for me. The idea being, if it's helpful for me, it's probably helpful for somebody else. Everyone's a little bit different. So my kind of premise is if you like a video, great. If you don't like a video, throw it away, right? You don't need to love everything. But in general, I want to share what I've learned here, isolating specifically for what makes me a better man. What makes me more sympathetic, more gracious, stronger, more likely to have a fight response instead of a flight response when the moment is right. That is what I'm aiming at with the YouTube channel, and I'm going to be releasing a video or two per week, depending on the content size. Some of these videos will be smaller form, 5 minutes, some of them longer, 15 minutes. This will ultimately lead up to the release of the book, Alpha, the Eight Challenges of Men. But in general, YouTube will be where I'll be releasing the content, and which is nice because easily turns into a podcast for the car and whatnot.
Yep, absolutely. All right, I love that. And the YouTube channel is your name.
That's right. Kirk Kappelhoff, look me up on YouTube. It's phonetic because it's German, so it's exactly how it sounds. Captain Kirk and then Kappelhoff.
Love that. And we'll have the link in the show notes for everybody too. So if you're listening to this, folks, and you're like, I want to go check out this YouTube channel, just go to the show notes, click the link, you're there. It's going to take you right there. So um, awesome. Kirk, I love everything that you're doing here, brother. I really do. The book I know is, sort of in wait, and it's like it's going to come soon. And that's going to be amazing when it does. The YouTube channel, I know that you're continually putting stuff on there. Let me just kind of throw this to you then as we, pull things together here
Mm,
on our way out. Is there anything that I didn't ask you? Is there
mm.
anything that we talked about and you want to make sure that you double down on, make a real good point with somebody? Is there, a nugget, a leave behind, anything like that you want to leave for these guys who are listening today? I'm going to give you the floor for a few minutes and,
Mm.
go ahead, brother.
Sure. I mean, you've asked some great questions. So first of all, thanks so much for having me on. It's been awesome.
Thanks, man.
I'm excited to come back. The next piece I'd say is this. One thing as an overall view when it comes to men is role modeling. So if you're asking as a man listening to this, what can I do to give back? Probably depends on the situation. If you have a family, that's your focus, right? If you have boys, if you have girls too, but boys obviously we're talking about, that's your focus to role model that. But if you don't, which is the case that I'm in, what can you do? Well, in pretty much every city, there is a Big Brothers and Big Sisters club. Join it. I found that the New York one here has done an incredible job of matching up big brothers with little brothers, and they have an incredible program to do so. Being the role model that these guys need, even if you're what you would consider a bad role model, I guarantee you will add more value to their life than if they have no role model at all. So that's what I'd say there from a giving back perspective. From a personal perspective, perhaps there's people listening that think, okay, I don't know if I'm in the 90% of the 10%. I don't know where I land. I don't even know how far down the 90% I am. What I'd say to them is this. Jim Rohn has this great quote. He says, you can't change your destination overnight, but you can change your direction overnight. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and be in the top 10% if you're at the 45th percentile. But there are things you can do today that will point you in the direction of the 10%, maybe 6 months, a year, 5 years from now. And there's more than one way to be in the top 10%. As far as I've identified, there's eight, four internal and four external. Focusing on those and kind of delaying the gratification of what we want right now, that's what's ultimately gonna serve you in the long run. And that's at least what I've found. So I'd encourage people to reach out to me too. I can give you the contact stuff from an email perspective. Obviously, leave any comments on the YouTube and I'll get back to those. But in general, just really passionate about this and would love to hear anybody's personal experiences with this. Surprisingly enough, I've actually heard a lot from mothers talking about their boys on this topic, quite concerned with where their boys are at, not so much from their boys are acting up perspective, but from what society is throwing at them and how they're dealing with
Wow. Pretty perceptive mothers. That's amazing.
it.
That's great to hear. All right, man. I love that. That was a great wrap up for us. Contact information. Best way to reach you for anybody who wants to contact you, talk about some of this stuff, find out more about the book, anything else.
Yeah, definitely. Shoot me an email at kirkkappelhoff@gmail.com. That's number one. Number two is you can always message me via YouTube and leave any comments there if they're specific to the videos. We can talk about those, but those would be the main two.
Perfect. All right, Kirk, I love everything you brought today, man. I've been enthralled. Honestly, I've just been sitting here like, no way, no way, no way. Listening to this stuff. I'm sure that this made a huge, huge impact on a lot of guys today. I want to thank you for doing all the work you've done
Mhm.
and for continuing to do it, not just for yourself, but for, other men out there as well. You're doing some really good service, brother, and I appreciate it. And thank you for being on the show today.
Appreciate it, Roy. Thanks for having me and looking forward to seeing you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, that's been another just awesome episode. I mean, honestly, knock you over type of episode of the Power Man podcast. And the reason we bring these powerful men on here with these powerful messages is because, we're united in you taking back your power to become a better protector, better provider, a better leader tomorrow than you are today, to become a better husband, a better father, a better man tomorrow than you are today. And the reason that we want that for you is because you matter. You have value and you're worth it. And at some point, you just have to believe it. Until next time.